Today's topic is vulnerability and courage and bravery. What is vulnerability? Is it a strength? Is it a weakness? Or is there more to vulnerability than just polar opposites? What is courage? What is bravery? How does it show up? How do you each relate to these three really powerful and impactful values?
I suppose for me, it is that these things kind of manifest at different stages in your life, and you have different reactions to them based on kind of what the environment is, I suppose. So, being vulnerable is at times easy, depending on kind of who you're with. Well, it's for me anyway, with my partner or close friends or family, particularly easy. And I suppose the only time when I find it difficult to be vulnerable would be in a new situation with new people. And that's just because I'm just assessing the situation and assessing, who's in the room before I choose to kind of be totally vulnerable. And I think that's good for the other people as much as it is good for me, to get an assessment of what's going on first. So I think that you actually have to be brave to be vulnerable. And the two kind of reinforce each other. Is that you can't really do one without the other, because when you're being vulnerable, you're deliberately letting your guard down in order to let other people in. And so that requires an element of risk, which is I suppose where the bravery comes in. That was my kind of first thoughts when you were talking about it, Reham. But yeah, I think that each thing kind of reinforces the other thing, and they don't exist without each other.
I think it's funny, isn't it? Because people often assume that when people are being brave, that they can't be scared, or that they're not vulnerable, or they're not worried about things. Quite often you then hear people say, well, I was terrified, but I just got on and did it. But I think, personally, sometimes they're detached, because sometimes, well, I don't know, is that true? I was going to say sometimes I'm not scared of a situation and I still wade in and deal with it. But maybe you don't need to be brave if you're not scared.
Exactly, yeah. I think that's very true.
So yeah, maybe they are always attached. For me, though, vulnerability is an interesting one, because it has for me, there's different levels of it. So, I've got friends with whom I can be absolutely open, and they get everything. And sometimes that's very messy. And I've got other people in my life that get some bits, but not everything. At times in my life, I've been in front of therapists or counsellors, and have tried to not be vulnerable, and then ended up being anyway. So yeah, it's quite setting specific, I think, for me, and connection specific with different people. And if I feel that I can be open, and therefore, I suppose to some degree vulnerable, in that they get everything good and bad and worried and brave and all the bits of you, then I don't mind that. I don't need to feel brave to be open with people. But then maybe that's developed over time. It didn't always be like that. And Bruce, you've just said it depends on what stage you're at in your life. I think that's very true. Because it does come with maturity, I think.
Just to follow on from that, Tim, as well, is I think that it's actually, being vulnerable with someone often is actually a really powerful tool in which to build a relationship with someone. And you can do it, and sometimes in the right context, when, we know it in our experiences, when we meet someone and they kind of tell you something and you're going, oh, okay, you're letting me in. Okay. And then you're aware of that's the kind of conversation you're having. And it can be really, in the right moment, in the right context, it can be really quite endearing. And I think that it's a really powerful way to build relationships. And there's certain things I feel like, I'm not there's maybe some things that other people would find impossible to share because it would make them look or feel vulnerable, but to me are maybe not things that, you know, that I'm worried how they'll perceive it. You know, I'm not worried about it, therefore it's not really a vulnerability, but it might be to other people, and so it feels like I'm being open when really it doesn't feel like I'm revealing very much. And I think that these things are always good, and it's good to measure it just based on who you're with, for your own safety, for their kind of, you know, building relationships. Because I think when people are kind of, you know, go straight into that in a situation, it makes it actually really difficult to relate sometimes if you've not built the safety and the space for those kind of conversations and situation to happen.
There's one thing that I spotted you mentioned about a specific situation or surroundings, environment that you would share, you know, some vulnerabilities with people. But I found it, vulnerability or a willingness to be vulnerable can be very useful in many situations in business, or like you mentioned, communication with others, building relationships. And I actually pretty much, and some people might think this is like oversharing, when you just like say something that you just explain this reaction, like, whoa, oh, okay, you're letting me in. So that might seem like oversharing, but I tend to actually get some kind of revelation right from the get-go to a person, because that breaks all the ice for me and shows this person that I'm not feeling superior, I'm not feeling any special, that we are on the same level. That, for example, if I'm talking about something brave that I did, something that took a lot of courage, I immediately followed that up with saying that I was really scared when I was doing it. Especially if I speak to people who are less experienced than me. One example is with my assistant, who is less experienced. And whenever she makes a mistake, I would make sure to tell her a story of how I messed up, and overshare how terrible I felt and how my feelings were, like how scared I was, and everything bad that happened that day. Being vulnerable, despite being her boss, allows me to give her like you know, the space to then feel acceptance, and then give them the freedom to kind of make those mistakes grow and improve in future projects. And that works in relationships as well. So for example, if I would go on a date with a girl, I would share a personal story straight away, something that is shows me from this really vulnerable human side, because I heard, for example, many girls would think, oh, I'm very arrogant, talkative, open, extroverted. So I just wanted to kind of bring it down by sharing a relatable experience. And it's super useful. I find it useful. And it usually also shows other characteristics in a person. It shows not just courage, but I also think it shows empathy. It shows just social awareness, I think, when you talk about that. So that's kind of my point of view. And I find it easy compared to my father, who was super closed, and he would never share. He was the tough guy. He would be like always, you know, doing his thing, never explaining himself, never saying why he would do it. And I think there was like this moment in his life when he was on his deathbed, I would say, and he would finally share something that he was scared of dying, and that was the first time that when my father kind of showed his vulnerability. And I think he should have done it earlier, and we all should do it on regular basis. That's why I'm like constantly doing that. Like, I'm not afraid to even here when we are talking, I'm not afraid of oversharing all those things on YouTube.
And I think it is the relatability part, because we often feel like our problems are so exclusive to us, and that, you know, we're the only ones that have gone through this, and that we've got a perception to keep up. And when you then are able to be vulnerable, then that's when everyone else goes, oh yeah, me too. I'm going through that too, or I've had that experience, or there's something that I can relate to. And I think it builds relationships so much faster. And I think it's particularly relevant actually when you think about the world today, where our social media profiles are not a true reflection on who we are and what we really feel, for the vast majority anyway. That almost makes it harder to be vulnerable sometimes, I think, for people, because there's like this perception that I now have, I've created, and I'm continuing to curate that perception. And so to deviate from that is actually a vulnerability, because you're letting people in on a side that, that you're not showing elsewhere. But the relatability is that people are like, oh, thank goodness, because I'm going through that too. And I'm building this fake profile too, but this is what we're all really like, and I think that's the bit that's the most powerful part of it.
It could be very brave, courageous thing to do if you were this kind of person. You could simply get out one day and on your Instagram, on your Facebook and whatever, and say, do you know what? I have to admit something. I've been building this fake persona. I'm not really that person. My life is not so glamorous. I make some money. I do this, I do that. But, just so you know, it's like I'm just a regular guy. And that could help potentially.
I think the irony of that is that post itself will probably then blow up and be your most popular post you've ever put out there.
Yeah, being a bit older, it's... the idea of building a fake persona online, in general day-to-day terms, is quite alien to me. It's much more, I get it much more in terms of the sort of male performance of being male. And it's interesting, Alan, you mentioned your dad being quite closed off. My father kind of was and kind of wasn't. He was quite an angry man, and you saw that a lot, so that was never really closed off. But I remember one time, he was a lay preacher, and so we were at church one time, and one of the people he was quite close to had died, and he had to announce it at church that John had died. And he broke down while he was saying about this at the rostrum. It wasn't a church as such, and had to go out to the bathrooms, and I followed him out because I'd never really seen my dad cry before, and to do it in such a public setting, with 300 people watching him, I just went and said to him, "You're right, must be hard," and the shutters were immediately there. He didn't let me in anyway, but I was glad I did it. But yeah, it's a funny one, because I think emotion, which is kind of what we're talking about, isn't it? We're talking about we'll let people in when we're feeling anxious or worried or not sure of ourselves, or we don't know what to do, or we've messed up. All these things that are poor performance, poor real life happening, the things that we don't get right or that don't look right. In terms of that, you kind of choose, don't you, which you open up about. I'm sure you do. It can't just be me, and not just my dad. So yeah, I think it's interesting, because again, coming back to what we said earlier, some emotions are okay to put out there. Bruce, you said, people think that you are being vulnerable, and actually you're just being yourself and what you're comfortable with. So it's so individual. I think it's quite difficult to talk about anybody else's experience in terms of this. And like I say, my dad in that instance shut down immediately and didn't want to take it any further. He didn't want to talk to me about it. I don't think he talked to my mum about it afterwards. it just went away after this sort of few minutes of tearful sadness in public. So yeah, it's a weird one.
Do you share when you have a moment like this? I'm not saying in terms of like if somebody died, but if there's a moment of sadness or you're scared, do you share it with someone on regular basis? I don't know, somebody from your family or your partner.
Yeah, it depends. I have certain people in my life that get everything. So you know, I've got a adult daughter who I am absolutely myself with, and she knows everything about me. I never pretend to be anything other than what I am in the moment with her, and that's been the same. Well, is it true? Is that true? I think it's true. I don't think there's anything I wouldn't share with her. And it's been the same since she's been 16, 17, you know, a grown-up person. And that developed out of our situation, of me and her mother being apart from when she was little. But it just seems natural. And I've got one or two other people in my life who are the same. And I think you feel, personally, I feel that with those people, it's okay. They don't need to be protected from the messes that I make or the worry I might cause by not being okay. They're big enough and they love me enough to help me carry that stuff.
What about people at work, especially people below you?
Well, it's a different situation in that people at work don't get my personal stuff because it's work. And because they get honesty and they get a real relationship, but they're only seeing a work part of me. And I think as a manager over the years, you know, in my early years of managing other people, I got into trouble for crossing those professional boundaries by trying to be friends with people and trying to be liked. And nowadays in work is work, and other people are where my personal, not professional life is seated.
And I think though that work's a great example of a place where we set the context and have a different degree of vulnerability, because you know, when a leadership position is a fantastic place to be vulnerable with people, but you're not giving them your you know, the deep depth of you necessarily with detail, but you are trying to relate to people and acknowledge with them that, you know, these are normal emotions or feelings because you've had experiences that are similar. That's a great way to do it. But I think it's so important that we know what the situation is and the context is when we're sharing, and I think that's just so important for getting the tone right for what you're doing, and that when you know, I find that when people are vulnerable with each other, it builds relationships so quickly. It's something that, you know, we used to do a lot as work, part of work, as was part of the kind of workshops around our programs. We do exercises where people become vulnerable. It's because it makes them, in our experience, far better leaders and people, as it turns out. But you have to start the session, have it in the session, and close the session and kind of move out of it if you're going to go deep. And I think that's the thing that we're talking about, is that you have to have that in the right moment. And in the right moment, it's fantastic. But in other times, we need to give a different degree of ourselves. And I think, you know, we have much better kind of relationships with people when we're on a relatively even relationship. So when you're vulnerable, they're vulnerable. But when you don't need to be, people recognize that as well.
And I think this comes back to, again, things I'm not worried about are not vulnerabilities. So in our workplace, we have, we've tried to be open about what motivates us. So you have that honesty there. And in another situation or in a different working environment, and I'm thinking, in some of the big, still macho corporate financial environments that we come across still these days, if you opened up to colleagues about some of the things that motivate our team, that could be used against you as a weakness, or as a show of disloyalty to the ethos of your contemporaries. So it's interesting, and again, it's about defining terms, I think. So for me to say in our team, I'm really not motivated by money, so I find it very hard to sell things. It puts me in a position where, if I have a boss that needs me to sell things, it's not the best thing to have opened up about. So, there's practicalities around this as well. I think you're right, Bruce. Kind of have to we have to monitor our participation in the context that we're in. And therefore maybe calling them vulnerabilities, for me, is a bit less than, it's a bit generalized. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, I would, in this actual example, I wouldn't agree. For example, with the selling part, I think the truth always comes out. And if a person is hiding the fact that they cannot sell and they don't have, like, they're not good at it, it will come out anyway. So why would they try to cover that up? Obviously, they might be in a situation where they need money, they need a job, they need something, and they try to do everything they can to get it. But I think that corporate environment where people fake something to get somewhere, eventually the truth will cut them. Will catch up with them. So I think this is not the way to go. For the future for people. In my opinion, they should be honest. They should be vulnerable. They should be courageous and admit to their weaknesses, even if it means in short term have less. But in the long run, it will actually pay out better, because I think they'll get a more suitable job, more suitable position, and they will maybe have a boss that will actually appreciate honesty. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I think the thing about that is that, it's okay to make trade-offs, but I feel anyway, it's okay to make, not every environment needs to serve me my entire self all the time. And I feel that very strongly about relationships, is that I don't expect any one relationship to give me absolutely everything that I need from it. Because I think that, mostly because I think that's unfair on the other person. And so I think that it's okay to sometimes moderate. What I would never condone is a whole workplace that kind of oppresses upon you, that you can't share any vulnerability, because that's a zero-sum game, because people can't come with the energy that they need to difficult tasks when they feel like there's a weight on the kind of emotional strain. So I don't think that you should tolerate that either. But I do think that sometimes you do need to be conscious of the situation and kind of act accordingly. But I also think that we need to recognize that it depends where you derive, I guess, your power from. Because if I don't mind being vulnerable with people, because I'm not expecting upon them to make me feel powerful. So I don't really care whether they know or not, because it's a gesture I'm giving them. I'm actually awarding them with a bit of an insight into me. How they receive it is really entirely up to them. That makes it easy to share. I suppose when you're in a situation where when you share, there's a consequence, it makes it much harder to share, and then you have to kind of weigh up the scenario. And I think that's maybe where it becomes difficult at work, because you're trying to assess different people at different times. So I think for your own well-being, it's good to be kind of conscious of who and when you're sharing.
So being that we're each in both work environments as well as in personal environments, how do you make decisions around being vulnerable, being courageous, or being brave with social media, with, you know, things that are sometimes out of our control? When somebody posts a picture that you don't want them to post personally, or work announces something, you know, and tags you on it, and it doesn't align with your values.
I suppose for me, again, being the old man of the group, I'm on Facebook. I don't have Facebook friends who post crap that, you know, is oppressive, misogynistic, racist, because I've got my nice little social bubble of lefty liberal snowflakes, and we all love everybody. So yeah, it's kind of tricky, but for me, it happens more in a work situation. So whereby if people say something that is out of line, then generally speaking, I will challenge them on it. And I learned a long time ago that I am challenging them because of my sense of what's right and wrong, rather than to defend anybody particularly, because of the things I genuinely feel. So again, it comes back to this, you know, is that being brave? And you know, we've just said it's the consequences or the judgment of what will the consequence of my action be. That's the measure of how brave you have to be to do it. So the consequences usually are that I'll either have an argument or somebody will back down, which is not, it's not massive, is it? It's a bit of a ding dong or nothing. So is that being brave? Probably not, but it is making sure that, you know, that I challenge when it's right to do so. And as a younger person, I know I didn't used to do that. It was much easier to say nothing.
What changed for you, Tim?
I don't know. I think the sense of what's right and what's wrong became more important, I suppose, than the temporary uncomfortableness of having to step up and say something. And that knowing how you want things to be becomes more certain over time. I mean, I've talked before in this group about challenging my mum on her treatment of my dad, because it seemed that he was taking advantage, and that, you know, that was at 11 or 12. So I think some things, yeah, I think for me it's the way that your values become concrete over time. So it was easy early on to see an injustice for my mother, because your mum's the first person for a lot of us that you spend lots of time with and you watch and you see the consequences of their actions. But for other things in the outside world, it took me longer to build those values and for them to become part of who I think I want to be.
I mean, I think that as a kind of really personal experience, it really kind of starts to make you think about, you know, where does it come from, and where does it stem from, I suppose, and it's a really interesting question, because I I guess so often at times, I think particularly when you're young and you're just kind of going through the motions, you don't really think about where's this motive, where's this manifested itself from, what was the kind of the root of it. Because I actually think that when I was young, I couldn't handle any injustice with anyone. I was like at school I was everyone's union rep. That's how I responded to everything. I was desperate to dive in and argue and be in front of everyone, and because partly in truth is because I really enjoyed the argument. I really enjoyed having the arguments with people, but it's because actually at home we argued all the time, and there was no really negative repercussion from any heated argument. It was just we argued about it, and then we kind of fizzled out. Someone was right or wrong, and it moved on from there. Mostly it was actually eventually being told we need to calm this down and meet our dinner. So like for me, actually, as I've got older, I've become more measured and probably more likely to, because through my work, I channel a lot of kind of like activist messaging around our kind of sustainable business and that kind of stuff. So we've got loads of opinions there, but in my kind of personal life, I'm much more likely to just be quite chilled out about most things, and kind of there's not much that really riles me up, to be honest with you, anymore. I think it's like I've exhausted it all in my teenage years, and I'm already feeling like I'm much more passive towards things. Things don't get a rise in the same way, and I think I feel like that's ultimately a good thing. I actually feel like I can call things out when it feels like it's appropriate to, but I don't feel I need to do the performance of calling things out in that way anymore. I don't feel called to have to prove it to anyone or justify why I feel a particular way. Like, I'm not interested in the performance or who's watching anymore.
I wanted to say that whenever I hear your story, Bruce, sometimes I wonder, like, we have lots of things in common. I think we're a little bit similar. And whenever I hear a story from you, I'm like, I recognize that behavior. I recognize this. I did some same things here. I'm just wondering if you're gonna find yourself in a similar position. One of the values that I appreciate a lot is honesty, integrity, and transparency. And Tim will be perfect. He was one of the people that experienced that on himself when I gave him a call some time ago. So I have this, let's call it a habit. Whenever I mess up really bad, or I do something stupid, or I do something that is really something that is out of order, or just I'm not even sure if it's out of order, but I think I messed up. I would go directly to the source, pick up the phone, and immediately try to tell the person that's the vulnerable part and the courage part, where I directly address the situation and things that happen before they escalate into some big problems in the future. They are very uncomfortable conversations. Many times I dread those phone calls. My girlfriend always tells me, like, I cannot believe you do that. Like, honestly, those are the phone calls that you don't want to do, and you have to do them at least once a week. You got to pick up that phone. You don't want to speak, but you do. And you just say, I messed up. I did something that I was not supposed to. I said something I was not supposed to, or this is like, you clarify things. And I did that with Tim. And I know there will be many situations in the future where things like this happen. And I found this very useful and liberating because you can catch those mistakes before they create a big domino effect, and then they destroy your reputation, or they destroy your career, just simply by being brave at the beginning and doing the hard, painful call at the beginning, rather than trying to rescue the situation a year from now, or whatever, when there's a unexpected contact from someone saying bad things about you.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that ownership of what's happened and trying to move things along, or giving an apology if it's needed. I think it's just part of being an adult, isn't it? It's owning what you do. I've been
It's
thinking.
not common. It's not common though. I totally agree. It's being an adult, but it's not so common these days.
No, I suppose not, and it's potentially with some of the role models that we've got, or some of the public figures we've got out there at the moment, it's getting less popular as well. But I've been thinking while we've been talking about how the relationship with my son is influenced by this topic, or how this topic interacts with my relationship with him. And it's interesting how vulnerability, I think, plays out in that, in whether you use the power that you have over a child in size, in knowledge, in experience, or whether you stay in the moment with them. And quite often that does take some apologizing. When our kids are 25 minutes into not putting their shoes on, and you end up yelling at them, apologizing for that really has to be the way forward, even though it might seem a silly example. But trying to get them to see that being loud and aggressive is not the right way to do things, and that you messed up by falling into it, is quite an interesting example of this for me.
I've got a question for you then, because I don't have children, and when I have one, I would love to know the answer to this. So please be my mentor in that moment.
Not the best for that.
So, like I explained to you, like I prefer to be vulnerable whenever possible, and not be afraid to, share. So, if let's say I have a little child, and something is happening in our marriage or in family, or just simply you happen to be tired or scared of something, you worry. Would you share with that little child that you worry, that you are stressed at work, and that's why you react this way? Would you be like treating this child like it was an adult, and you just like telling them, oh, I act this way because, I'm a little bit, tired or overworked, I'm going to do better next time, whatever? Or would you not say anything like that? You just keep being the strong father figure?
I have. It kind of sounds like a justification sometimes, but I know that I need him to understand that it's harder to be doing the right thing when you're tired, when you're worried, when things are not going right. So yeah, it's where appropriate, and where there's time to have a proper conversation where they're listening, and that you're both communicating in a good place, then I think those explanations really help. That we slip and we get things wrong when we've not got our full focus and our energy on getting them right. So, and that makes some situations in life easier than others. I think what's more difficult to explain to a child are some of the issues that are around emotional maturity. So, because you could because they're just not ready. I mean, there is a difference between being a child and being an adult. So some of the issues are a bit complex, but you know, the straightforward, simple stuff that makes up 90% of living, as far as I'm concerned, that most of that stuff can be talked about openly and honestly. Yeah.
I mean, I don't have any children, so I have no qualified opinion on whatsoever. But I am often aware. So my partner works in high school in the kind of behavioural department, and we have similar conversations, believe it or not. And this is not to do with the behaviour level, but just to do with managing people. Is that we share stories that are similar. With my experience being, you know, having a team of people and trying to manage their different emotions and guess also what stage they're at for like information and what they've agreed to take on and what is my responsibility and what's their responsibility. You know, sometimes sharing too much with them is really not fair for them at all, because that's not their responsibility. There's nothing they can really do in that situation. You've just added pressure that they will likely worry about. But in other times, it's really important to explain through, you know, why I might have responded in the way that I ought not to, and that it's okay that I did that because I've caught it, I'm acknowledging it, I'm apologizing for it. We're modeling the fact we all make mistakes. And then people, I think, feel great about that because they're like, great, there's a model for me to follow when I make a mistake too. And like the parallels between like the experiences and stories I have working with a team, it's really quite funny sometimes. In the business, like articles and stories about like human-led leadership, and then the stuff in schools around nurture, it's the same stuff, it's the same language. Is that it's about kind of nurturing a relationship, and then as you build the relationship and as they advance, you can share more, and you can then start to share the burdens of life with people. But I guess what you don't want to do is overburden them, and it makes it very difficult potentially for them to be able to open up later on because they're carrying this stuff and not knowing how to process it.
It's interesting watching that change over the last 25 years in business. You know, I think we've got largely Daniel Goldman and Nathaniel, what's his face, the self-awareness guy, to thank for that, you know, you didn't used to have that human leadership because you could get results without it. And to some degree, like, you know, Alan said as well, that openness and honesty and owning up to your mistakes, we seem to be creeping away from it in some areas of life because people want to be macho and gung-ho and not care about other people. But yeah, it's a lovely change in business, and speaking to more and more employers who want to be caring about those around them and the world around them makes it more of a relatable setting, doesn't it, between humans, which is lovely.
I think what is good is that finally people are opening up their eyes and they realize that being fake macho is not courage, and being vulnerable and doing the right thing is courage. So they kind of realize what actually is important, and what basically you cannot really fake that courage once you learn it. And yeah, that whole facade closeness of a macho guy is like the thing of the past. But I wanted to hit on another angle with courage, and since we were talking about parenting a little bit and children, so my parents have been very courageous straight from the get-go. When we were very young, me and my brother, my parents would give me and my brother a lot of freedom to go out and go do some shopping, get some stuff done for them. Like, I don't remember the age exactly, but basically they would let us out of the house very early and trust that we would handle certain tasks that they've been asking us to do whether it was shopping, whether it was my mom asked me to go travel across the town to get something for her from our auntie. They would basically get us to be as independent and self-reliant as quickly as possible, even though maybe before we even were, big enough to do that and capable enough to doing that. But they were courageous into letting us go do that. Now, on the other side, you have parents who are being very protective, and they are like, we are not gonna basically put their children under a cloche and not let them do things. And they lack this courage, because it requires courage to let your kid do something that sometimes may be dangerous for them. Even just letting them outside of your house without your protection is, scary and could be dangerous, depending on where you live also. But you need to be brave enough and trusting enough to your kid to do it. And it's kind of like interesting for me to observe this, because there are different families of different people that I interact with, and I see some would let their kids get out, do something very early, and some will be like, no, you're not going anywhere without me, hold my hand, let's cross the road together, and so on. So I'm just wondering where this courage comes from. Like, is it from here, the fact that I want my child to be capable, therefore I'm going to trust and believe and be brave in my decisions? Or is it a different place that comes from? I really don't know, but I'm kind of curious.
Again, I'm going to jump in, Tim, because I feel I'm going to give you the expert position, as you actually have kids and I don't. So so this is just all conjecture. But when you were speaking there, Alan, I was thinking, I suppose the courage to give your kids that freedom maybe comes because you've taken the steps to kind of walk them through scenarios in a more safer environment prior to that. So you're hopefully giving them a bit of exposure to risk, but actually it's not that much risk, and so you're kind of slowly extending the boundaries. And so I imagine it's very daunting the first time you let them out when you're not there, but maybe you just do that for a short period of time. That's what I would imagine is it's about phasing that out over time. And it's good to be put in the stretch zone sometimes. So as a kid, you might feel like, I can't believe I'm being allowed to do this, particularly if your peers are not being able to do it. But actually, hopefully, as the parents in this scenario, they're aware that it's not actually nearly as daunting or as worrying as you feel it is. And so I think that's I would imagine that's the way how you actually feel when you've got kids and you're letting them out and you can't see them and you don't know who they're. And that's maybe why my parents asked me 20 questions anytime I left the house. Where are you going? Who are you going with? Where are you going to be? Is John's mum know you're going? All that kind of stuff, because they want to get a read on it.
But they had to be really brave to do it, to be honest. Like, when you want to get your kid out, even though you ask those questions, they have to have the, I just cannot imagine how stressful it has to be when you get to get that kid out for the first time.
But I think also, there is an element of, certainly the impression I felt is that I believed that my parents believed in me. So whether that was them faking that and they're performing that out, good job, because I lapped it up. But I believed that they had confidence in my ability. So when I would leave to do something, I was excited and kind of pumped up for doing it, rather than, I certainly didn't get the impression that they were really kind of worried about it. Because when they were worried about things, you feel that anxiety as a kid really strongly. When they're nervous about something, that's something that is kind of really quite, prevalent. So maybe it's part of maybe they're performing it, or maybe they do actually just kind of, they do believe that you're more than capable of this and you'll be okay.
Yeah, and I think, again, life seems to have changed a bit in this regard. So, I've got little kids and I've got a grown-up one. And attitudes have changed. And for me, it's about anxiety, and anxiety generated by communities of interest and popular belief about how dangerous things are.
Mm-hmm.
And the parallel, I suppose, for me is around, again, being a manager in a workplace, that, you know, you delegate tasks to people and they have an element of challenge, but a massive element of belief that the job will be done to a certain standard. And you want to grow your people into confident, capable workers that can do what you need them to. And it's the same with kids, that, you know, you want to challenge them a little bit, but you also want them to grow confidently, and being confident means I am a person that can do this thing. So you spoon feed it to some degree, and I think, I mean, I'm saying that because although I don't like being a parent, I love my kids, and I wouldn't want any harm to come to them. But part of, you know, what I see as harm is the stunting of that confident growth. So, you know, there's an element of risk, like you say, Alan, in letting people out to play. But my personal understanding of the world is that I don't think is as bad as the Daily Mail says it is. Whereas, you know, groups of mums of kids at our school, when you hear them talking in the playground, the world is full of paedophiles, you know, round every gatepost. So therefore I can't possibly let my children out anywhere. But a lot of those same kids are kind of sat with a screen in front of them, not experiencing the real world either. So, you know, we've all got our own personal view on how we bring our kids up. But I think for most people, they really care about their kids, and they judge what's going to harm them and what will help them grow.
How is it any different from a partner, for example, when your partner goes off to work or goes on a holiday and they're exposed to other people?
I agree.
You have to have faith and believe and trust in the values that you've aligned with your partner as you have with your children, maybe on a different level.
You're not responsible for them, are you?
Depends. Are you wearing your protective hat?
Nah.
I'll give you an example. I usually have this because my girlfriend tends to cycle without a bike helmet. And whenever she gets on that bike and I see her driving, like riding away, I'm shaking and like in anger, and like I don't wanna, you know, tell her what to do. And like I can say like, please put a helmet on or something, but she's kind of you know, stubborn, and she doesn't do that. So you kind of have to trust it. And again, being like, there's like partly the courage, the bravery, the trust. I think it's an integral part, by the way. Trusting and believing in something, it's an integral part to this equation you were talking about, Riham. So yeah, it happens the same. It's not just, you know, worrying about the partner doing something like going off to another person. It's just simple, regular stuff that happens every day, that you worry, because obviously you don't want your partner that something happens to them, no?
It's interesting though, because as I'm hearing that, like one of the things that's coming to me is like, why do men take on everyone's like fear and responsibility for everyone all the time? Because like, you know, the way they're talking, and sometimes we're sounding like, you know, like it's our responsibility to save and protect these people and stop them from, you know, like, you know, Alan, if your partner doesn't wear a helmet, like it's your fault because you didn't stop her. I mean, it's not your fault, man. You know, it's not your fault. I mean, I think it's really important that men take a step back and say, you know, I can encourage someone to do something because I think it would be good for them, and you know, selfishly, it would make me feel so much better. You can try to empathize with people, but you can't take responsibility for that because it's not your responsibility. And I think it's good once kids get to a certain age that we relinquish that back more and more as well. Is that it's not your responsibility to like make sure they're safe all the time. Your responsibility is to give them the tools to help themselves to be safe, because that is the problem. We've got people who are I see this explosion of anxiety, and it's because people are worried about everything all of the time. And I feel like, you've not been given the tools to manage these things, and that's a problem. It's a systemic failing, that we've not enabled enough young people to have the tools to manage these things. But it's also because I think people feel like they have to have too much responsibility over other people as well. And I think it's important for our own health to take a step back sometimes and relinquish control that we're never meant to have.
You bring up such a valuable point, Bruce, because that's the fine line between being vulnerable and being trusting, like Alan was saying, being courageous and brave, like Tim was talking about, and being codependent and, creating a bond where you're overemphasizing the need that people have to constantly serve you or your needs when it's really not about us.
I think that it's like, we've got to, we build much better relationships, I think, with people when we're able to recognize everyone's individual agency and their individual power. And then when we're able to be honest with each other about that, then, we do things to support each other. And I think people make concessions for each other. So if in that example, someone might actually make a concession to help you if you're feeling particularly anxious about something, and that's all good. But I also think that it's really important that we are self-sufficient, and it's something that that is for me is strength. So I feel strong in my life, but don't ask me to pick up a heavy weight. I'm not that strong, but I feel strong in my life because I feel self-sufficient, and I feel like I'm able to tackle problems, and probably enables me to be vulnerable in some cases, but also not be fully reliant on someone else, but recognize that I need other people to support me, but that no one person should be fully responsible for that. But I think also, just to say about, linking it back to the parenting thing, is I think that it's good for, there to be a parental figure that is there as you're going, and then knows when to step back. And that's really, really significant, because you need to, it's like, helping someone ride a bike, you need to let them think they're riding the bike, step back, and they're actually capable of doing it. I think it's surely that analogy follows you through different stages in your childhood as well.
Yeah, it's interesting that the offer of support and the offer of care and the offer of considering options, which is how I see what you've just said, Bruce, about knowing how far to go and when to let go, and trying to get children to take responsibility for what is their responsibility, even from an early age. There's lots in life that starts early on, that we seem to forget sometimes. So yeah, it's an interesting one, and for me, it comes back to assertiveness. This idea of, I know what I want and what I need. I know what I'm responsible for, and that stops at the line where you know what you want and need and what you're responsible for, and we offer support to each other to do those things, but we don't cross that line. And again, for me, that's what being adult and human is about. But I wonder, for some people, when they want to control others or take responsibility for others, or not allow other people to have their own agency or responsibilities, is that because there is so little in modern Western life that we do really have control over? Is this the same reason that men hit women? It's an exercise of the little power that they have left in a world that says normal individuals don't really count that much. And I think in degrees, both of you, Alan and Bruce, you you are confident in business, or in the work that you do, might be a better phrase for it. And others of us are not, leaders in work or self-employed business people or whatever. And where does that come from? Is that parents that have equipped you early on to be like that and be confident naturally? Is it, I see a difference in Scotland between people who've been to private school and public school.
Oh yeah.
Or state school. And the people that I see go through private schooling very often are much more confident, not always, in tandem with their abilities, but certainly in this idea of I can go and do what I want to do. And that's a natural state for me. So definitely I think that, there's a great element of upbringing and early experience and nurture around that, and then the rest comes later, doesn't it, as we mature into what we want to be. But yeah, that element of overstepping the mark into somebody else's responsibility is very costly for all concerned. And if we could teach that out of people early on. I've been wangling into every bit of work that I've done for the last 25 years is saying we should teach kids in primary school how to be assertive. And nobody's ever listened. But I keep banging on about it.
But the system doesn't want them to be assertive. That's for absolute certain.
So I think that's the role of parents. I think I'm grateful for how I was brought up, and it's mainly, I think, because of my mother, who was feisty, small little woman who was, kind of in a position of power a little bit. She was a right hand of a man who was running a pawn shop. So kind of, she was basically running the town, and maybe for me that was more strong of a figure compared to my dad, and I learned the independence from her, and she was pushing me to do that. And I think, like, to kind of maybe wrap everything, all the thoughts into one, I would say just to kind of maybe encourage others to try, to do something courageous. Just believe in themselves and just try to do something courageous if they haven't tried. Kind of, if it's sharing the vulnerability, if they've never done it, just try for the first time, share some detail from their life that they never shared, maybe with their partner or with someone in their immediate circle. Just generally, basically making the first step into this bravery, this courage, this assertiveness. And I think, in my opinion, that it's like a muscle. The more you do it, the stronger it becomes, and the more confident you become, and it just becomes like a second nature, and it helps in life in many situations. So that's kind of like an uplifting point for me. I think just give it a go, try, and if you can already do it, maybe be an example for someone else. I can officially say that I am that kind of example for my girlfriend. She's less assertive and she's not so confident, and I'm trying every day to do something courageous for her to see that she can follow and maybe try herself, and then I support her in doing that. And I think it's working very well. We both grow as a couple. We grow as a separate individuals. So yeah, if we can all help each other become a little bit more courageous, it'll be great.
I think one of the easy steps into this is to say, I don't know, when you don't know, rather than pretend you do or make up some spurious answer. Because that's one of the really basic examples of this for me, is that people worry about not having all the answers, and none of us have all the answers. So yeah, for me, that the practical advice around this was, the next time that somebody asks you something or to do something you're not sure about, to say, I don't know, but I'll still have a go at it with some help from somewhere.
Yeah, and I think just to echo all that, I think that the best thing any of us can do is remember that we're all human, we're all people, we're all going through challenges and things, and so the challenges that we face are likely to be reflected in the people around us. And when you realize that, it means you can empathize with them, which means that you can be more open and you can have more kind of authentic conversations and relationships, which I think is so important at the moment. And just starting that with people is, you know, being open is a great place to start, I think. But you also want to make sure that it's okay to say no, it's okay to be assertive, but you can do it with a smile. Not everything, you know, being assertive is not about being angry or aggressive. It's just about being clear about what's right for you. And in my experience, people love boundaries. And as soon as you set those boundaries, people really are respectful of that, and they'll then let you know their boundaries. And so it creates a good context for you to start, you know, being more open and more vulnerable.
Thank you, gentlemen, for a very interesting direction to the conversation, from vulnerability to bravery to courage to responsibility, accountability, and agency. The most important thing is know that everybody has an impact on others when we make our decisions. So when we come from a place of groundedness and not fear or not insecurity, there's so much that can come from that. Be it vulnerability, be it courage, be it bravery, or anything else. So join us on our next episode of the Genuine Men's Chat show, podcast, and Zoom Live. Share, like, and follow the Genuine Men's Chat channel on YouTube and our posts in LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter. Join the Genuine Men's Chat Facebook group to join other men in these discussions. Our motto in 2020 is many men, many conversations. Have you taken your seat at the table yet? See you next time.